Hi everyone, welcome back to What I've Been Watching. I took one vacation a couple weeks back and watched a lot of movies, and I kept watching movies, and then I took another vacation and I'm watching more movies. So I'm substantially behind, so let's get caught up really fast, kind of quick fire. Most of these are catalog movies anyway, things I've seen before. So we'll just talk about them briefly and we will get caught up and we will go back to our regularly scheduled nonsense on the next episode. Let's get started. Oh, so this is why Robert De Niro was in Joker. When Joker came out, everyone kind of talked about how it was just a knockoff of The King of Comedy. And yeah, I see it now. This is a very good Scorsese movie. It's not in the upper echelon of Scorsese movies for me. It's got a great central performance from Robert De Niro. Everybody's good in the movie. It's just not for me, like what makes Scorsese Scorsese, if you know what I mean. Good, if not great. Cujo is helped out by two elements. One is the cinematography by Jan de Bont, and two is the overwhelmingly chaotic soundtrack. 90% of terror in this movie is from sound. Just the sound of Cujo attacking is overwhelming, and the way Jan de Bont shot it just mixes up beautifully into a stew of horror. I've heard a couple people say that this does not hold up. I disagree wholeheartedly. I thought it was great. And this is the first time I've seen this movie. I thought it was great. Your enjoyment of Yorgos Lanthimos' Alps is going to be completely dependent on if you know anything about it going in. If you Google this film, the Google synopsis will ruin the movie for you. So don't do that if you want to see it. The first third of this thing is a mystery box. What is going on? It's confusing, it's not quite clear what's happening, but it snaps into focus at the first of the second act. And when that happens, because I didn't know what was going on going into it, I was absolutely horrified by this movie. But as that kind of subsided and I got back into groove with the film, the third act is a beautiful meditation on grieving and loss. This is one of my favorite Yorgos movies of the ones I've seen, and I think I only have two left to go. But I really dug this film. I thought it was pretty beautiful once you get past the horror of it all. But that was my experience with it. If you know anything about this film going into it, your mileage may vary. Troy, another one I've never seen. I have this book of 501 must-see movies, and this was one of them, even though if you read the review in that book, it's not overwhelmingly positive. But I had always heard that the director's cut of this film is better than the theatrical release. And I saw the director's cut, I read the differences, I tend to agree. Everything's a little bit more fleshed out, a little bit more detail-oriented. I really enjoyed this film for being a sword and sandals epic. The characterizations are all good, the acting's all good, Brad Pitt's pretty great in it. It uses some of the early versions of AI fighting each other. So a lot of the long shots, the wide shots where you see a bunch of people fighting each other, it's computer animated AI. And it's pretty cool, and it all still seems pretty up to date and visually flawless to this day. All right, now some ones that I've seen already. 2001: A Space Odyssey is not my favorite Stanley Kubrick film. There's a lot of this movie just being in love with itself as you watch it. Maybe in 1968 when it came out, these special effects wowed people and these long shots were amazing, but we've moved on and it seems dated because of that. It's funny how I remember the first act of this movie being a lot shorter than it really is, and the third act of this film being a lot longer than it really is. The opposite is true. The middle third is the third that everyone remembers. And that is still excellent. And the way they pulled off some of those shots it's just amazing. But all in all, it's just not one of my favorite Kubrick films. It's fun to revisit every so often like I did here, but not an overwhelming love for this one from me. It is fun to see a movie that's 2 hours and 20 minutes long that has an intermission slate. Times were different. The only thing that really seems dated about Demolition Man is the fact that all of the television screens are 4x3. It's the only thing that really dates it. Now it's just kind of an alternative future because a lot of the stuff that they talk about in the film kind of happened in a roundabout way, but it is a future that doesn't seem too futuristic now, but it's still a fun movie. I still enjoy Stallone and Wesley Snipes in this film. Dennis Leary's supporting role is great, but it's Dennis Leary doing 90s Dennis Leary stuff. I bought this movie because it is a favorite of mine. I've seen it a ton of times. This is the first time I've seen it, I believe, in its original aspect ratio on Blu-ray. It was a cheap purchase. It is cheap entertainment. Jaws is another film I don't think I've ever seen in its original aspect ratio, and it really does change the movie not seeing this thing in pan and scan 4:3, either on VHS or on television. I hadn't seen it in a while, and it's amazing how much of this film is shot in single shot takes. I know a lot has been made of the ferry scene, that being a single shot take where the camera is locked off, and based on Spielberg's blocking of his actors, he's able to get a wide shot, a two shot, and a close-up shot just based on how the actors are walking around in the scene. That is great, but this movie is full of those moments. Sure, the editing picks up as the action picks up, but for the most part, this movie is a lot of long takes, and it's kind of amazing for an early Spielberg. I also watched the Blu-ray restoration of this thing, and the movie has never looked better. It is gorgeous. Spotlight is one of my favorite Best Picture winners of recent memory. The script on this thing is amazing, and I love how the script reinforces its thesis statements throughout its running time, and how the cinematography and how they place the actors in a scene also reinforce that thesis statement. I know it's a hard watch. I mean, it's not the happiest of subject matter, but man, this movie's good. This is the second time I've seen Knives Out, and it still plays pretty well. Rian Johnson obviously has a love for the whodunit genre, and he does really nice work here. The thing that stuck out to me this time is how every shot in this movie is either on a dolly or on a tripod. They're all locked down for the most part, except for one sequence which is shot in handheld. And when that shot begins, I don't know if it was on purpose or not, but it looks like a camera being taken off a tripod. And that just little touch really tickled me. And it is just a ton of fun to watch Chris Evans have fun in this movie. All right, back to the new watches. All I can say is a documentary film about the rise of the band Blind Melon through the eyes of their lead singer, Shannon Hoon. For those of you who don't know, Shannon Hoon passed away, overdose, at the height of the band's popularity. But Shannon Hoon spent most of his time starting in Lafayette, Indiana, and moving to LA, and joining the band, and becoming very popular, recording his memories on video cassette. So the film is made up of nothing but Shannon Hoon's home videos, and that tells the story. It's kind of a magic trick in a way, that the filmmakers were able to take Shannon Hoon's memories and make a coherent narrative without any narration and very, very few slates or text on the screen. There's some at the beginning, there's some at the end, but for the most part, it's non-existent. Shannon Hoon tells this story, and it's kind of interesting to watch a magic trick like this unfold. All I could think about after the film was over was how much Almost Famous nailed the rock musician experience. Almost to a T. But this film is very good at laying out Shannon Hoon's life just through his words, and for that, it's pretty good. Looks like we're in new watches for a while. Spiral from the Book of Saw is a disappointing sequel to the Saw series. I spent the first half of this movie incredibly distracted, mostly because the filmmaker shot on digital, it's 8K digital, without what looks like even an attempt to make it look like film stock. Everything is so clean and so fluid and so flatly lit for the most part that it distracted me. And it's disappointing because this is directed by Darren Lynn Bousman, who directed 3 of the original Saw films. And he has a good visual style and a good eye for this type of movie, but this movie's such a police story, it's not really a Saw film all that much, that those scenes where he's relying on actors in front of a camera telling a detailed story kind of fall flat. It's quite honestly not that scary. There are some jump scares which are well performed. I'm not sure Chris Rock is the right actor for this role, but the role of the Saw sequels has always been to push you to be excited for the next film, and this one just doesn't. It's disappointing because I did like Jigsaw for the most part, and was excited to see what the Sperrig brothers, I believe it's pronounced, were going to do with the series, but Boseman's back. This movie looks bad, it's unmemorable, and it's not good. I had never seen Annie Hall before, and of course it's Woody Allen's most famous film, so I probably should see it if I'm gonna be shitting on Wonder Wheel. This is actually a very good movie. It's funny throughout its running time. The performances are pretty good from Woody Allen and Diane Keaton. It has its cake and eats it too in terms of the ending, able to give you the Hollywood ending while also giving you the realistic ending. It's an entertaining film. I see why people praise it. So now that I've seen this, I can say that officially, Wonder Wheel is a piece of shit. I put Red Dawn in my to-watch list because I think I watched a documentary about John Milius at some point in time. I thought I should probably watch his most famous movie. And it's simple. Simple is the word that comes to mind. There's invaders, there's kids that attack the invaders. End of plot. There's not a lot of character development. It turns into a lot of shooting in the second and third acts. Patrick Swayze's pretty good, if not over the top so. It's okay. A lot of the puzzle box of Sunshine was unlocked for me with the closing credits, directed by Danny Boyle, which I knew already, and then it said written by Alex Garland, and I said, okay, now I know what I just watched. It's about the nature of God, as all Alex Garland movies are. As far as his writing is concerned, it's probably the most simple narrative he's written, which makes it the least interesting for me. It's very straightforward Hollywood fare. It looks really good. It has some pretty intense sequences, but it doesn't linger with you like Ex Machina does. All right, we're getting there. Woodstock 99, Peace, Love, and Rage is a documentary film. It's the first in a series produced by Bill Simmons for HBO. And it is a 2-hour documentary about Woodstock 99, the famous festival that turned into chaos on its last day. Or at least that's what I thought. This documentary lays it out pretty well that it was chaos from day one and a product of the times. In that, what was happening in society and in music at the time fed into the anger that fueled this fire, so to speak. This is a well-made documentary. It's an interesting documentary and never lost my attention throughout its 2-hour running time. But man, is it grim. It is dark from minute one. It's also really depressing because the anger that you see on display here hasn't seemed to dissipate over the last 21 years. I can't wait to see what comes next in this series. If you have HBO Max, it's well worth your time, if incredibly depressing. All right, another movie I've seen before, 12 Monkeys. I don't remember much of this movie, quite honestly. I think I wasn't old enough to really get it when I saw it the first time, but having seen it now, Brad Pitt is fantastic in this movie, so is Bruce Willis. It's always refreshing to go back in time and watch a performance from Bruce Willis where he gives a damn. It's very much a Terry Gilliam film. It looks like Brazil as far as shooting style is concerned, but it's good. It gets a little silly at times, but it's very good. The throughput of all these is Patrick Swayze and Brad Pitt, apparently. Roadhouse is a movie where Patrick Swayze is a bouncer at a bar, and he's hired at another bar to clean up the bar and to stop the fights and whatnot when he gets drawn into the small town's problems. a la Three Amigos. And that's where the film lost me. I liked it when it was Patrick Swayze cleaning up this bar, dealing with the day-to-day operations. But when it got to the bigger picture, the movie gets really silly. The antagonist is cartoonish, the ending is over-the-top ridiculous. It was one of those movies I was told to see, so now I've seen it, and it was a mixed bag. Speaking of a mixed bag, Southbound, which is a horror anthology which uses some of the filmmakers who made the film VHS. And the problem with horror anthologies that come from different directors is that they usually vary widely in quality from segment to segment. The two best segments in this film come from David Bruckner, whose segment really amps up the gore but is very good, and the bookend segments which come from the directing collective Radio Silence, and the second half of which made me want to see their Scream even more. That thing's gonna be a ton of fun. This thing is inconsistent, as all horror anthologies kind of are sometimes, unless it comes from one director. Thinking of you, Trick or Treat. But as far as this one's concerned, there is one weak segment among the bunch that is not as well done. You'll know it when you see it, but I think that Bruckner and Radio Silence's segments really make up for it. This was entertaining for me. The Empty Man is a movie that kind of came out of nowhere. It sat on the shelf for a very long time. It seems like 20th Century Fox, in an effort to get rid of it, dumped it during a pandemic just to get it out of their hands. And did so hastily enough that they forgot to take the 20th Century Fox logo off the front of it. It's supposed to have the 20th Century Studios logo and just didn't because they made a mistake. It had been sitting on the shelf for a while. This is a weird movie, which is frequently very creepy, orchestrated really well, but at times seems like a rough cut. And that's partly because the director, David Pryor, says it is a rough cut. He wanted to cut another 6 minutes off the running time. It's a long film, about 2 hours and 15 minutes. He wanted to chop it a little bit to make it more cohesive and wasn't able to do so because they dumped it into theaters so fast. That and bad test gradings made it so he couldn't finish the edit of the film. Welcome to the studio system. But yeah, I liked it as more of an experimental film. It's strange to see a major studio release something this weird and this experimental. It's sad that this movie is going to get mixed in with movies like The Bye-Bye Man or Slender Man because it has man in the title. This is a much more interesting attempt at making a film. It takes chances. It's not always successful, but it's unique as hell. All right, this is getting long. We're on new watches all the way to the end, so let's knock these out. The Good Liar is a movie with Ian McKellen and Helen Mirren, where Ian McKellen is a con man trying to con Helen Mirren, but as a viewer, you know what's going to happen almost immediately, if only because the movie pretty much tells you right off the bat. And there's two moments of somewhat shoddy acting from Helen Mirren that kind of give away the story. It's not shoddy acting on her behalf. Her character is acting shoddily, if that makes sense. But it's fun to see these two actors in a movie together, but the movie's not very good. They deserve better material. A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood is an interesting premise for a movie. Of course, Tom Hanks as Mr. Rogers is on the front of this thing, but this movie's not really about Mr. Rogers as a man, because that story has been told before, and what you saw is what you got as far as his persona on TV to his persona in real life. So this movie is about a journalist interviewing Mr. Rogers and how Mr. Rogers affected his life. And in a way, the movie is more about Mr. Rogers' effect on us as people than it is about Mr. Rogers. And it's very successful in doing this. There is a moment about 2/3 through this film that if the film has not been successful up until this point, it would have blown up, because they do a thing with the direct address that if you're not there as an audience member, you're never going to be there. But I was there. I saw what they were doing, and it was effective. I really enjoyed this film and the way they put it together. It's an interesting take on a biopic. Frozen is a fun little bit of nightmare fuel. Not that one, that one. 3 people get trapped on a ski lift overnight and there's wolves about. It's kind of all my worst fears in one movie. Cinematically speaking, its movie looks great and it's shot really well, which really ramps up the tension throughout its running time. Some of the acting is spotty. There is one bit of screenwriting which is just downright bad, and the actress asked to pull off that monologue is not the strongest, so it's a chunk of movie that they could have cut out and it would have been a better film. But it's, as a bit of nightmare fuel, pretty fun. Worth watching for cinematography alone. A Quiet Place Part 2, also nightmare fuel. But more of the same if you saw the first one. It's an extension of the story. It's an expansion of the story. It does what a good sequel must do. Expand the story while giving you the elements that you loved about the first one. Some cool single shot takes in this thing. I really like what Krasinski's doing with the series. During Jolt, I had this little itch at the back of my head. And that itching said to me, this movie's not good enough for a theatrical release. This movie seems like it deserves to be on streaming. And that's weird to say because the content on streaming services have been raised to such a level that they're almost as good as theatrical releases, if not better in some cases, that this type of movie is something that you would not get any promotion on Netflix, and you just be interested in it and you turn it on and you fall asleep to it. Like, it doesn't do anything well enough to really be memorable in any way, shape, or form, and it's on Amazon, which doesn't have the same type of leniency when it comes to their content that Netflix has. Everything on Amazon has to be great, and this just isn't. This is by the numbers, doesn't do anything new, boring, forgettable. Also on Amazon, The Tomorrow War, which is actually pretty good. I enjoyed this quite a bit. I know the reviews weren't super positive on it, but for a popcorn flick, this is a heck of a good time. It's Chris Pratt, 2 hours, he's shooting aliens, cracking jokes. It is what it is. The creature effects are really, really cool on this thing. It looked like the digital effects were done by Weta Workshop, who always does phenomenal work, and this is no different. It looks great, it's entertaining as hell, I liked it. And we finished with our old friend Yorgos. Dogtooth, I knew a little bit about going in, just from a synopsis on the streaming service I watched it on, but I didn't know enough to ruin it, because I don't think this film is ruinable because, if that's a word, not sure that's a word, because I don't think the film ever lays out what's happening in enough detail for it to be ruined, if that makes any sense. You kind of get a gist of what is happening throughout the film's running time, but it never really spells it out for you why what's happening is happening. You get what is happening, but you don't know why, and it doesn't matter. All of the trigger warnings of this thing, strong sexual content, violence, like if you're offended by anything, this is not the movie for you. And it's also in Greek, and it's a bunch of single shot takes, a lot of lockdown camera work. It's really weird because it's a Yorgos Lanthimos film. I liked it. It's among my favorite of his films. He hasn't made many movies, so that's not that hard of a list to get on. It's not up there with The Killing of a Sacred Deer as far as I'm concerned when it comes to my favorite of his films. That one still takes the cake. But this one is really interesting for being as slow-paced and tedious and alien it is. But most of his films are weird, slow-paced, and alien. So he's got that going for him. And we are caught up. I need to go watch more movies now. I should probably edit this video. Let's go edit this video. What have you guys been watching? Anything cool? See you next week.